The water heater had been making that sound for 3 days, a low humming that resonated through the basement walls, and Rachel Navarro finally accepted she'd have to investigate it herself rather than waiting for a plumber who kept rescheduling. She descended the wooden stairs into the basement of her Colorado Springs bungalow, flashlight in hand, despite the overhead bulbs that illuminated most of the space. The house was old, built in 1952 by some optimistic family chasing the post-war suburban dream, and its basement reflected that era's construction philosophy: concrete floors, exposed joists, and enough spider webs to suggest the previous owners hadn't spent much time down here. Rachel had been living here 8 months since buying the place with her VA loan, and she'd used the basement primarily for storage and laundry, rarely venturing into its darker corners. Beside her on the stairs, moving with the careful deliberation that marked all his explorations of new territory, Atlas descended one step at a time. The Doberman Pinscher was 4 years old, 75 pounds of muscle and intelligence that had served alongside Rachel for 3 years in Air Force security forces before they'd both separated from active duty. He'd been trained for base security and patrol work, had excellent instincts about threats and anomalies, and right now his body language suggested he detected something unusual about the basement's atmosphere. Rachel reached the bottom of the stairs and moved toward the water heater, which sat in the basement's northwest corner behind a stack of moving boxes she hadn't yet unpacked. The humming was definitely coming from that direction, though it didn't sound quite like mechanical vibration. It was more musical somehow, more resonant, with harmonics that suggested something other than simple motor operation. She pushed aside boxes to access the water heater and immediately saw the problem wasn't with the appliance itself. The unit sat silent and cold, its pilot light extinguished, its controls showing no signs of power or operation. But the humming continued, and now that she was closer, Rachel could tell it was coming from behind the water heater, from the basement's exterior wall. Atlas whined, his uncertainty clear. He'd moved to Rachel's side and now pressed against her leg, his attention fixed on the wall where the humming originated. She reached down to reassure him, then pulled her phone out and used its flashlight to examine the wall more carefully. The concrete showed a crack, perhaps 6 inches long, running vertically from floor to about waist height. Rachel had noticed it during her pre-purchase inspection and been told it was normal settling, nothing that compromised the foundation's integrity. But looking at it now, she realized the crack wasn't just a break in the concrete. It was glowing, faintly, with a blue-green luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the humming. Rachel's first rational thought was that she'd somehow exposed electrical wiring, that the crack had revealed cables carrying current that created both light and vibration. But electrical wiring didn't glow blue-green, didn't hum with musical harmonics, and didn't make her dog this nervous. She reached toward the crack carefully, hand extended to feel for heat or vibration, and the moment her fingertips touched the concrete beside the glowing seam, everything changed. The crack widened explosively, concrete crumbling away in chunks that fell to the floor, with crashes that made Atlas bark in alarm. The opening that remained wasn't a crack anymore, but a doorway, roughly 7 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And through that doorway, Rachel could see something that violated every understanding she had of how basements and houses and physical reality worked. The view beyond the doorway didn't show dirt or foundation, or any of the materials that should exist behind a basement wall. Instead, it showed a corridor, smooth and metallic, illuminated by the same blue-green light that had marked the crack. The corridor extended perhaps 50 feet before turning corner that blocked further view, and its walls were covered in patterns that might have been writing or decoration or control panels. Rachel couldn't tell which. She backed away from the doorway, Atlas moving with her, both of them staring at the impossible opening in her basement wall. Rachel's military training provided frameworks for assessing threats and anomalies, but nothing in that training addressed finding alien corridors behind your water heater. Her mind cycled through possibilities: hallucination from carbon monoxide exposure, elaborate prank by previous owners, some kind of hidden room the inspection had missed. None of those explanations matched what she was seeing. Atlas barked again, but not at the doorway. He was staring at something inside the corridor, and Rachel followed his gaze to see movement. A shape, perhaps 3 feet tall, moving along the corridor's far wall with mechanical precision. It was vaguely humanoid, with a head and torso and limbs, but its proportions were wrong, and its surface gleamed like polished metal or ceramic. As Rachel watched, it paused, seemed to notice the open doorway, and turned to face her directly. For 3 seconds, woman and dog and alien machine regarded each other across the threshold between basement and corridor. Then the machine moved, flowing toward them with speed that suggested hydraulic power or something more advanced, and Rachel made a decision she'd probably question later. She grabbed the water heater and pulled with all her strength, tipping it forward to block the doorway while she and Atlas retreated up the stairs. The machine reached the doorway just as the water heater crashed into place, and Rachel heard impact, metal on metal, that confirmed the machine was real and physical and trying to get through. She slammed the basement door behind her, locked it with hands that shook slightly, and stood in her kitchen trying to process what had just happened. Her phone was still in her hand, and muscle memory made her check for signal, even though calling anyone about this felt absurd. Who did you contact when you found an alien portal in your basement? The police would think she was crazy. The Air Force might be interested, but would probably involve classifications and NDAs that would make her life complicated. And explaining to anyone that she'd just blocked an alien machine with her water heater sounded like the setup to a joke rather than a legitimate crisis. Atlas had moved to the basement door and was sniffing at the gap beneath it, his body rigid with attention. Rachel joined him and heard sounds from below, scraping, mechanical movement, and that same musical humming but louder now. Whatever was down there was trying to get through the water heater blockage, and Rachel had no idea whether her improvised barrier would hold or how long she had before the situation escalated beyond her ability to control. She needed help, needed expertise she didn't possess, needed someone who could assess what she'd found and make decisions about response. But first, she needed information. She pulled up her phone's voice recorder and began documenting everything, speaking clearly and deliberately the way she'd been trained to give after-action reports. This is Rachel Navarro, former Staff Sergeant, Air Force Security Forces. Date is November 7th. Time is approximately 14:30 hours. I'm in my residence at, she gave her address, and I've discovered what appears to be an anomalous opening in my basement wall. The opening leads to a corridor of unknown origin, showing technology inconsistent with human construction. I've observed at least one autonomous machine of unknown purpose attempting to access my residence through the opening. I've established temporary barrier, and am requesting immediate assistance from appropriate authorities. She ended the recording and sent it via email to 3 addresses: her former squadron commander, the local Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and her own backup account in case something happened to her phone. Then she called 911, knowing they'd probably dismiss her as disturbed, but needing the official record of a report made. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Rachel Navarro. I'm a military veteran, and I've discovered an unidentified structure in my basement that appears to pose potential security threat. I need law enforcement and possibly military response at my location. Ma'am, what kind of structure? I can't adequately describe it, but it's not part of my house's original construction, it appeared suddenly, and there are autonomous machines of unknown origin attempting to access my residence through it. Silence on the line. Then, ma'am, are you alone? I'm with my dog, and I'm completely serious about this threat. I need immediate response. I'm dispatching a unit to your location. Please stay on the line. Rachel stayed on the line while the dispatcher asked questions about her mental health history, current medications, and whether she'd been drinking or using drugs. The questions were necessary from the dispatcher's perspective, but felt insulting given the circumstances. Rachel answered patiently, understanding that nothing she said would sound credible until someone else witnessed what was in her basement. The first police unit arrived 12 minutes later, 2 officers who approached her door with the cautious professional demeanor that suggested the dispatcher had flagged this call as potentially involving a mental health crisis. Rachel met them on her porch, Atlas sitting beside her in perfect heel position, both of them probably looking more stable than the dispatcher's notes suggested. Officers, thank you for responding. I know my call probably sounded strange, but I need you to see something before you make any judgments about my mental state. The senior officer, a woman perhaps in her late 30s with sergeant stripes, studied Rachel with careful assessment. Ma'am, dispatch said something about structures and machines in your basement. That's correct. I was investigating a noise from my water heater and discovered an opening in my basement wall that leads to a corridor I can't explain. There are machines inside that corridor, and one of them tried to enter my house before I blocked the entrance. And you're a military veteran? Air Force Security Forces, separated 6 months ago with honorable discharge. I've worked base security, patrol operations, and threat assessment. I know how to evaluate unusual situations, and I know when something exceeds my ability to handle alone. The sergeant glanced at her partner, a younger man who looked skeptical but willing to follow protocol. Okay, Ms. Navarro, can you show us this opening? They followed Rachel inside, and she led them to the basement door. The sounds from below were quieter now, just the musical humming and occasional scraping. Rachel opened the door and descended the stairs with the officers following, Atlas bringing up the rear in perfect tactical formation. The water heater still blocked the doorway, but the officers could see the opening around its edges, the blue-green light spilling into the basement's normal illumination. The sergeant approached carefully, hand on her service weapon, and examined the opening without touching anything. What is that light? I don't know, but it's been constant since the opening appeared. And you said machines? Rachel pointed to movement visible through the gap between water heater and door frame. The machine was still there, its metallic surface catching the blue-green light, its movements mechanical but purposeful, as it attempted to find a way past the barrier. The sergeant pulled out her radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. We're going to need supervisor and probably Air Force OSI at this location. We've got a situation that exceeds standard law enforcement response. The call went out, and within 30 minutes Rachel's house was surrounded by official vehicles. Local police had established perimeter, Air Force OSI had sent investigators from Peterson Space Force Base, and someone from NORAD was apparently en route because Colorado Springs hosted enough military installations that unexplained phenomena triggered multi-agency response. Rachel spent those 30 minutes in her kitchen answering questions, providing her military credentials, and watching through her window as more personnel arrived. Atlas stayed close, his presence grounding her while the situation spiraled into complexity she'd hoped to avoid. She'd done the right thing reporting this, but the right thing was rapidly transforming her private life into official investigation that would probably involve classifications and restrictions she didn't want. An Air Force colonel arrived just before 1600 hours, introducing himself as Colonel Mark Stevens from Space Operations Command. He was perhaps 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent time in demanding assignments, and his demeanor suggested he took Rachel's report seriously, even if he didn't yet understand its implications. Staff Sergeant Navarro, I've reviewed your service record and the initial reports from local law enforcement. I need to see what's in your basement. They descended together, along with 2 OSI agents and the police sergeant who'd responded initially. The water heater still held its position, and the machine was still visible through the gap. Colonel Stevens examined the opening carefully, then turned to Rachel. You said this appeared suddenly? No prior indication of any opening or anomaly? None. The wall was solid concrete until I touched the crack. Then it just crumbled away. And the corridor beyond? I only saw it briefly before blocking the entrance, but it extends at least 50 feet, shows technology I can't identify, and was occupied by machines that responded to my presence. Colonel Stevens pulled out a tablet and made notes, his expression neutral but his focus intense. Finally, he looked at Rachel directly. Staff Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you is classified. By hearing it, you're accepting obligations regarding disclosure and secrecy. Do you understand? I understand, sir. This isn't the first anomalous opening we've documented in Colorado Springs. There have been 3 others in the past 18 months, all showing similar characteristics. Sudden appearance, alien technology visible beyond the threshold, autonomous machines responding to human presence. We've been investigating quietly, trying to understand what these openings are and whether they pose security threat. Rachel felt her understanding shift. She wasn't the first person to find alien corridors behind their basement walls. This was part of a pattern, a phenomenon that military authorities knew about and were tracking. What have you learned from the other sites? Not as much as we'd like. The openings are unstable, they close after varying periods ranging from hours to days. The machines are advanced but non-hostile. They seem more interested in observation than conflict. And the corridors appear to be part of larger structure that exists in space, separate from our normal reality. Separate space? Like a parallel dimension or pocket universe, we're not sure which. But these openings are windows into that space. temporary connections that allow brief interaction between our world and whatever exists beyond. Rachel looked at the doorway, at the machine still visible through the gap, at the blue-green light that marked the boundary between her basement and somewhere else. Why are they opening here? Why Colorado Springs? We don't know, but the concentration suggests something about this location is significant, possibly related to the magnetic anomalies or the altitude or maybe just random chance. The investigation is ongoing. One of the OSI agents spoke up. "Sir, should we attempt extraction of the machine for study?" Colonel Stevens considered. "Not yet. Past attempts have triggered defensive responses. We'll document thoroughly, monitor for changes, and see if we can establish communication protocol before attempting physical intervention." They spent the next hours setting up monitoring equipment, cameras and sensors positioned to capture everything visible through the doorway while maintaining safe distance from the machine. Rachel was asked to remain available for questioning and observation, essentially becoming part of the investigation team by virtue of this opening existing in her property. By evening, her house had been transformed into temporary field station, with personnel monitoring the basement continuously, and Rachel relegated to her living room with Atlas. She made dinner without appetite, fed her dog, and tried to process the day's events into some framework that made sense. This morning she'd been a veteran adjusting to civilian life, dealing with house maintenance and job applications and the slow process of building post-military existence. Now she was apparently living on top of an alien portal, her basement occupied by military investigators and her immediate future uncertain. If you've ever had your normal life suddenly invaded by something inexplicable, you might want to hear what happened next in Rachel's story. And maybe, if this kind of unexpected discovery and the way ordinary people handle extraordinary situations interests you, you'd subscribe to follow along as this situation unfolds, because what's coming next makes this opening scene look simple by comparison. The machine in the corridor remained visible through the gap, its movements suggesting observation rather than aggression. Rachel watched it on the monitors that had been set up in her living room, fascinated, despite her anxiety, by the smoothness of its motion and the obvious sophistication of its design. Whatever intelligence had built it possessed technology far beyond human current capabilities, and that technology was now accessible through her basement wall. Colonel Stevens returned around 2100 hours with coffee and a tablet full of questions. He sat across from Rachel in her living room and began what he called a deep dive interview about everything she'd observed and experienced. Had she noticed any unusual activity before today? Any strange sounds or lights? Any electronic interference or unexpected behavior from appliances or devices? Rachel thought carefully before answering. There was the humming, which started 3 days ago. I assumed it was the water heater, but thinking back, the sound was coming from the wall, not the appliance. And Atlas has been nervous in the basement for about a week. Wouldn't go down there without me, even though he's usually fine with any part of the house. "Dogs can sense things we miss," Colonel Stevens said. "Electromagnetic fields, subsonic vibrations, possibly even dimensional instabilities if these openings are what we think they are." "What do you think they are?" He set down his coffee and met her eyes. "Honestly, we think they're portals created by an alien intelligence, probably automated, possibly part of exploration or study of our world. The machines we've observed don't seem hostile, but they're definitely collecting data. Every time an opening appears, the machines document everything they can see, take measurements, record observations. They're studying us, Staff Sergeant. And we're trying to study them back before the opportunities close. How long do these openings last? The shortest was 6 hours, the longest was 4 days. We've learned to work fast, to gather as much information as possible before the opening closes and we lose access. And what happens if someone tries to go through? Into the corridor?" Colonel Stevens hesitated. "We don't know. No one's attempted it. The risk of not being able to return, or encountering hostile response inside their space, seems too high without better understanding of what we're dealing with." Rachel looked at the monitor showing her basement, at the doorway that had appeared so suddenly and was apparently temporary. "But someone will have to try eventually. If we want to understand what these openings are and who's creating them, someone will have to cross through and investigate directly." "Yes, but that someone would need specific training, psychological preparation, and probably more protective equipment than we currently possess. It's not a decision we'd make lightly." They talked for another hour, Rachel providing every detail she could remember about the opening's appearance and the machine's behavior. Finally, Colonel Stevens stood to leave, his expression mixing fatigue and something approaching admiration. "Staff Sergeant, you handled this situation exactly right. Most people would have panicked or tried to investigate alone, or posted about it on social media before thinking about security implications. You maintained composure, reported through proper channels, and cooperated with investigation. That's exemplary citizenship and military bearing. Thank you, sir, but what happens now to my house, my life, my ability to just live normally? Short term, we maintain presence until the opening closes. Long term, we'll probably want to keep monitoring equipment installed in case it reopens. You'll receive compensation for the disruption and the use of your property, and you'll be briefed regularly on what we learn. But I won't lie to you. Your life just got complicated in ways that will probably persist long after this specific opening closes." He left, and Rachel sat alone with Atlas and the monitors showing her occupied basement. Complicated was an understatement. Her house was now flagged as site of alien contact, her privacy compromised by necessary investigation, and her future likely involving continued military interest, regardless of what she wanted. She'd bought this place for stability and independence, a foundation for rebuilding civilian life after military service. Instead, she'd gotten portals and machines and questions that might never have satisfying answers. The night passed slowly, Rachel dozing on her couch while personnel rotated through monitoring shifts in her basement. Atlas stayed close, his presence comforting even when she couldn't quite manage actual rest. Around 0300 hours, alert tones from the monitors woke her fully, and she looked at the screens to see the machine had moved closer to the opening, was now positioned directly at the gap created by the fallen water heater. She descended to the basement carefully, where the overnight team was documenting the machine's new behavior. It wasn't trying to push through anymore, wasn't attempting to overcome the barrier. Instead, it appeared to be examining the water heater itself, its sensors or whatever served that function, passing slowly over the appliance's surface. "What's it doing?" Rachel asked the tech monitoring the sensors. "Reading the water heater maybe, taking measurements. It did the same thing with the concrete around the opening earlier, like it's trying to understand the materials and construction methods. So it's studying us the same way we're studying it." Exactly. Mutual observation across a very thin boundary. Rachel watched the machine work, fascinated by the way it moved and examined its environment with what seemed like scientific curiosity rather than threat assessment. Whatever intelligence guided it was interested in knowledge, in understanding, and that interest felt more compatible with human values than any hostile intent would have. She pulled out her phone and took video of the machine's behavior, documenting it from her perspective even though official cameras were recording everything. This was happening in her house, to her life, and she wanted personal record that wasn't filtered through military classification or official reporting requirements. The video showed the machine clearly, its metallic surface and precise movements, and the obvious sophistication of its design. Over the next days, the pattern continued. The opening remained stable, the machine conducted its observations, and Rachel's house stayed occupied by rotating teams of investigators and analysts. She went to her part-time job at a local security company, came home to find her basement full of personnel, and gradually adjusted to the surreal nature of living on top of an alien portal. The media eventually caught wind that something unusual was happening at her address. Military vehicles and personnel suggesting either security incident or major investigation. Rachel declined all interview requests, referred questions to Air Force Public Affairs, and generally tried to maintain privacy that was already badly compromised. Some neighbors were curious, others concerned, a few actively hostile about the disruption to their quiet street. On the fifth day, the machine withdrew from the opening, retreating back down the corridor until it was barely visible in the distance. 2 hours later, the blue-green light began to fade, and by evening the opening was closing, concrete reforming across the gap until only a faint seam remained to mark where the portal had existed. Colonel Stevens arrived to oversee the closure and debrief Rachel on what would happen next. They sat in her kitchen while technicians packed equipment in the basement below. "The opening is closed, but our analysis suggests it may reopen. The pattern with other sites has been cyclical, openings appearing and closing on what might be a schedule or might be random. We'd like to keep monitoring equipment installed, concealed but functional, so we can detect and respond if your basement becomes active again. Do I have a choice? Legally, yes, but pragmatically, this situation involves potential national security implications that override normal property rights. We'll compensate you fairly, minimize intrusion as much as possible, but we need continued access to this site. Rachel had expected this answer, but still felt the weight of lost autonomy. Okay, but I want to be involved in the investigation, not just a passive property owner. I found this opening, I handled the initial contact, and I've got military training that's relevant to this situation. Use me, Colonel. Don't just warehouse me on the sidelines. He considered her request with obvious assessment of her capabilities and the complications her involvement might create. Finally, he nodded. I can bring you in as civilian consultant, give you security clearance upgrades and access to investigation details. You'd attend briefings, review findings, possibly participate in response planning if another opening occurs here or elsewhere. Does that interest you? Yes, sir, it does. Then report to Peterson Space Force Base on Monday. We'll start your clearance process and integration into the investigation team. He left, and Rachel stood in her empty house, listening to technicians pack equipment and restore her basement to something approaching normal. The opening was closed, the machines were gone, but the experience had marked her indelibly. She'd found something extraordinary, had been given a glimpse of intelligence and technology far beyond human understanding, and that glimpse had changed how she viewed her place in the universe. Atlas whined softly, and Rachel knelt to scratch behind his ears. What do you think, boy? We just got volunteered for something that's going to take over our lives, didn't we? He licked her face, his version of agreement or comfort or simple acknowledgement that they were in this together, whatever this became. And Rachel drew strength from that partnership, from the knowledge that she wouldn't face whatever came next alone. They'd been through military service together, had navigated transitions and challenges and dangers that demanded their best. This was just another challenge, stranger than most but not fundamentally different from anything else they'd faced. The next weeks were intensive, Rachel undergoing security clearances and briefings that revealed the full scope of what the military knew about the openings and the intelligence behind them. The phenomena had been occurring for 3 years, concentrated in Colorado Springs, but with scattered reports from other locations around the globe. Every opening showed the same characteristics: alien technology, observational machines, temporary duration, and apparent interest in human civilization without clear hostile intent. The working theory was that some advanced civilization was conducting survey or study of Earth, using automated portals and machines to gather information without direct contact. Whether they intended eventual communication or were simply cataloging primitive worlds was unknown. But the concentration of openings in Colorado Springs suggested something about the location was significant, possibly related to the military installations or the geological features or something else the investigators hadn't yet identified. Rachel absorbed this information with the same focused attention she'd brought to military training, understanding that knowledge was preparation, and preparation increased chances of appropriate response when circumstances demanded it. She attended briefings, reviewed analysis from previous openings, and studied footage of the machines and corridors that had been documented at other sites. She also met other property owners who'd experienced openings, a small group of civilians whose lives had been disrupted by alien portals and who'd chosen involvement over passive observation. They shared experiences and coping strategies, forming something like support network for people dealing with situations their friends and family couldn't relate to or even know about due to classification. One of those property owners was David Chen, an engineer in his 60s whose garage had hosted an opening the previous year. He'd gone further than Rachel had, attempting communication with the machines using mathematical patterns and light signals. The machines had responded, confirming they possessed intelligence capable of interpreting human attempts at contact, but the conversation had remained rudimentary before the opening closed. "They're curious about us," David told Rachel over coffee at a diner near Peterson Space Force Base. "But they're also cautious, like they're following protocols that limit interaction. I think they want to understand us before revealing more about themselves or their purposes." "Have you seen your opening reopen?" "Not yet, but I dream about it sometimes, about walking through into their space and seeing what they want to show us. The colonel says no one's attempted crossing through, But someone will have to eventually. We can't understand what they are or want through observation alone. Rachel had been thinking the same thing, feeling the pull of that unopened door, the possibility of discovery that might answer questions about humanity's place in a universe that was clearly more populated and complex than most people imagined. She'd joined the Air Force partly for that sense of purpose and exploration, the chance to be part of something larger than civilian life offered. This investigation scratched that same itch, but at a scale that made military service feel parochial by comparison. 3 months after her basement opening closed, Rachel was attending weekly briefings and serving on response teams that deployed when new openings were detected. She'd left her security company job and was now employed full-time as civilian consultant to Space Operations Command, her military experience and direct contact with the phenomena making her valuable for assessment and planning. She was in one of those briefings when the alert came through. Her basement had just reopened, the monitoring equipment detecting the same signatures that had preceded the first opening. Rachel's heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding her system the way it had during security responses on Air Force bases. This was happening again, at her house, and this time she had knowledge and preparation the first opening hadn't allowed. Colonel Stevens turned to her. "Staff Sergeant, how quickly can you be at your residence?" 20 minutes if I skip traffic laws, 30 if I don't." "Skip them. We need eyes on this opening as soon as possible, and you know your property better than any team we could send." Rachel grabbed her go-bag, loaded Atlas into her truck, and drove to her house with emergency lights authorized for her vehicle during portal response. She arrived to find her street already being cordoned off by local police who'd been alerted to provide perimeter security. Rachel badged through and entered her house, descending to the basement where the opening was already fully formed. The doorway looked exactly as she remembered it, blue-green light spilling from the corridor beyond, and through that doorway, Rachel could see the machines. Not just one this time, but 3, arranged in what might have been formation or simply efficient positioning for observation. They were different types, she noted, varying sizes and configurations that suggested specialized functions. She pulled out her phone and started documenting, narrating what she saw the way she'd been trained in after-action reporting. 3 machines visible, designated Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, based on position left to right. Alpha appears similar to the machine observed during first opening. Bravo is larger, approximately 4 feet tall with multiple appendages suggesting manipulation capability. Charlie is smaller, maybe 2 feet, and appears more mobile with what look like wheels or treads for movement. The machines noticed her, their attention shifting to focus on her presence at the doorway. But unlike the first opening, they didn't approach aggressively or attempt to enter her space. They maintained their positions, observing her as she observed them, and the interaction felt less threatening than curious. Rachel made a decision that would probably generate controversy during the debrief, but felt right in the moment. She spoke directly to the machines, voice clear and projecting into the corridor. "My name is Rachel Navarro. I'm human. I live in this structure, and I mean you no harm. Can you understand me?" For several seconds, nothing changed. Then Charlie, the smallest machine, moved forward, rolling across the corridor floor until it was positioned directly at the threshold. It paused there, some kind of sensor array extending from its top, and Rachel heard a sound she hadn't noticed during the first opening. A voice artificial and synthesized, speaking English with no accent or inflection. "Understanding confirmed. Communication protocol accepted. We mean no harm to human Rachel Navarro or structure or species. We observe and record. We collect knowledge of developing civilizations for archive and study." Rachel felt her breath catch. Direct communication, actual conversation with alien intelligence, happening in her basement through a portal that had appeared in her wall. This was first contact, the moment that science fiction had been preparing humanity for, but which still felt surreal and overwhelming when it actually occurred. She knelt to bring herself closer to Charlie's level, maintaining non-threatening posture, while keeping Atlas behind her in case the situation somehow turned dangerous. "Why are you here? Why Colorado Springs specifically?" This location shows high concentration of organized intelligence activity, military installations, aerospace development, scientific research, optimal site for observing human civilization at current technological development stage. And the portals. Why do they open and close? Portals utilize significant energy, cannot maintain constant connection, open for observation cycles, close for resource recovery, repeat according to schedule, optimized for data collection without excessive drain on generation systems. Rachel processed that information while her mind spun through implications. These weren't random occurrences or accidents. They were deliberate observation posts, alien surveillance of human civilization, conducted through automated portals that opened and closed on calculated schedules. How long have you been observing Earth? Approximately 207 Earth years in this location, longer in other locations. Your species shows rapid development, from pre-industrial to nuclear to space-capable in single lifetime, unusual acceleration worthy of extended study, 200 years. These machines, or their predecessors, had been watching humanity since before the Civil War, documenting progress through Industrial Revolution and World Wars and the Space Age. Rachel's house sat on top of observation post that predated her family's arrival in America by generations. What happens with the information you collect? Data transmits to archive. Archive exists outside your space-time continuum. Archive preserves knowledge of all observed civilizations for study by future researchers and potential contact when observed species reaches sufficient development level. What level is sufficient? Variable by species. For humans, probably within your next century. Your trajectory suggests capability for mutual comprehension and exchange approaching. Until then, observation continues. The response team arrived before Rachel could ask more questions, personnel filling her basement with equipment and expertise. Charlie retreated back into the corridor, and the other machines moved to join it, their brief contact with Rachel apparently complete for now. Colonel Stevens arrived shortly after, his expression mixing excitement and concern when Rachel briefed him on the conversation. You engaged directly with the entity, established verbal communication. It spoke first, sir. Responded to my introduction with clear statement of purpose and non-hostile intent. I thought gathering intelligence was more important than waiting for approval to interact. He couldn't quite suppress his smile. You thought correctly, but Rachel, do you understand what you just accomplished? First confirmed verbal communication with alien intelligence. Every word of that conversation will be analyzed for decades. You just made history. I just asked questions, sir. You asked the right questions and got answers that transform our understanding of these phenomena. We thought we were dealing with random exploration or simple surveillance. Instead, we're dealing with deliberate long-term study by intelligence that's been watching us for centuries and apparently plans to make contact when we're ready. That changes everything. The implications of that change rippled through official channels over the following days. Rachel's conversation with Charlie was transcribed, analyzed, and shared with increasingly high levels of government and military authority. Questions about what to do with this information, how to prepare for potential contact within the next century, and what humanity's response should be to confirmed alien surveillance, generated debates that Rachel watched from the periphery of her security clearance level. But in her basement, the practical reality continued. The portal remained open for 6 days this time, and Charlie returned to the threshold on multiple occasions to continue the conversation Rachel had initiated. She learned that the machines were semi-autonomous, given broad directives by their creators, but capable of adapting protocols when circumstances warranted. She learned that thousands of observation posts existed throughout the galaxy, monitoring developing civilizations and feeding data to archives that preserved knowledge across geological timescales. She learned that humanity was considered promising, a species whose rapid technological development and growing sophistication suggested potential for joining what Charlie called the community of mature civilizations. If humanity could navigate the dangers of its own advancement without self-destructing, the machines were watching for that outcome, recording humanity's progress or possible failure, preparing data that would inform decisions about when and whether to initiate formal contact. What happens if we fail? Rachel asked during one of these conversations. If we destroy ourselves before reaching the development level you're waiting for? Archive records your civilization as it was. Knowledge preserved even if species is lost. History teaches future civilizations through examples of both success and failure. Your existence contributes to archive, regardless of outcome. That's cold comfort. Archive serves purposes beyond comfort. Knowledge is goal. Preservation of what was Teaching of what might be, guidance for what could become. Your species will be remembered whether you succeed or not. If you're following along with this story and finding yourself wondering what you'd ask if you could talk to alien intelligence through a portal in your basement, you might want to subscribe to see where this goes next. Because Rachel's questions are about to get more personal, more urgent, and the answers are going to force decisions about what humans do with knowledge we weren't quite ready to possess. Hit that subscribe button, give this story a like if it's pulling you in, and maybe share it with someone who'd appreciate how first contact might actually happen, not through dramatic space battles, but through patient machines in a Colorado basement, teaching us that we're being watched, studied, and judged on whether we're ready to join something larger than ourselves. The portal closed on day 6, and Rachel returned to briefings and analysis sessions where her conversations with Charlie were debated by experts in linguistics, anthropology, and strategic planning. Some argued humanity should find ways to accelerate contact, to demonstrate readiness before the aliens' timeline suggested. Others wanted more caution, more preparation, arguing that rushing contact before humanity had resolved its internal conflicts and achieved greater unity would be dangerous. Rachel listened to these debates with growing frustration. The people making decisions were treating this as abstract policy problem, something to be analyzed and planned and controlled through proper channels. But Rachel had spoken directly to the intelligence on the other side of those portals. She'd heard Charlie's synthesized voice explaining that humanity was being evaluated, that contact depended on demonstrating sufficient maturity, and that the timeline was measured in decades, not centuries. She spoke up during one briefing, her voice cutting through the debate. With respect, we're approaching this wrong. We're treating it like a situation we can control through better planning and analysis. But we're not in control. They are. They've been watching us for 200 years. They're operating on timelines we barely comprehend, and they'll make contact when they decide we're ready, not when we decide we're ready. Our only real choice is whether we use the time we have to actually become ready, or whether we waste it debating abstractions. Colonel Stevens, who'd been chairing the meeting, nodded slowly. What would you suggest, Rachel? I'd suggest we focus on demonstrating the qualities they're looking for. Reduced conflict, increased cooperation, evidence that we can handle our own problems before we try to engage with alien civilizations. And I'd suggest we maintain communication through the portals when they open, learn as much as we can, show them we're interested in dialogue, not just observation. You're proposing we use you as ambassador. I'm proposing we use anyone who's established communication as bridge. But yes, if my basement is going to keep opening portals, and if Charlie is willing to talk to me, then I should talk back. Someone has to, and it might as well be someone they've already accepted as conversation partner. The meeting ended without clear resolution, but Rachel's point had been made. Over the next months, as more portals opened at various locations around Colorado Springs, the response shifted from pure observation to attempted communication. Rachel trained other contactees in techniques she'd developed, shared what she'd learned about the machine's knowledge and limitations, and generally helped establish protocols for engagement that balanced caution with genuine attempts at mutual understanding. Her basement portal opened 3 more times that year, each opening lasting longer and allowing more extensive conversations. Rachel learned about the archive's structure, about the civilizations that had been observed, and those that had achieved contact. She learned about technologies the mature civilizations possessed, capabilities that made human current advancement look primitive, but which were theoretically achievable given time and sustained development. And she learned about the criteria that would determine when humanity received formal contact invitation: political stability, demonstrated capacity for cooperation across cultural boundaries, achievement of sustainable relationship with planetary environment, development of technologies that indicated readiness for responsible interaction with other civilizations. None of these were binary thresholds, but rather accumulating evidence that humanity could handle the responsibilities that came with knowing the universe was populated and that we weren't alone. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on Rachel sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, and Atlas sensed her anxiety. She'd become bridge between humanity and intelligence we weren't quite ready to meet, carrying responsibility for conversations that would be analyzed for generations. Every word she spoke to Charlie was recorded and studied. Every question she asked shaped how humans understood the aliens, and probably how the aliens understood humans. But there was also privilege in this role, opportunity that few people in history had ever received. Rachel was learning things about the universe and humanity's place in it that most people would never know, at least not until contact became public. She was part of something that transcended individual life and national boundaries and even planetary concerns. She was helping prepare humanity for the moment when we'd finally have to admit we were part of something much larger than ourselves. 2 years after the first portal opened in her basement, Rachel was promoted within the investigation team to senior consultant, her expertise and direct contact experience making her valuable for training and protocol development. She worked with international partners who'd experienced similar phenomena in their countries, shared information across boundaries that normal classification would have prevented, and generally helped build framework for human response to confirmed alien surveillance. Her relationship with Charlie deepened through repeated conversations, developing something that felt almost like friendship, despite the vast differences in their nature and purpose. The machine asked questions about human culture and history, seeking to understand motivations and behaviors its programming couldn't easily interpret. Rachel tried to explain things like art and religion and the human need for meaning, concepts that didn't translate easily to machine intelligence, but which Charlie seemed genuinely interested in comprehending. Why do humans create representations of reality instead of simply experiencing reality directly? Charlie asked during one conversation. Because representations help us understand and communicate experience. Art lets us show others what we see and feel. Stories let us teach lessons without requiring everyone to live through every experience. Creation is how we make sense of existence. This suggests human intelligence is primarily interpretive rather than strictly rational. We're both. Rational when we need to be, interpretive when rationality isn't sufficient. The combination makes us adaptable, lets us handle situations that pure logic alone couldn't navigate. Archive will note this distinction. Interpretive capability may explain human rapid development despite inefficient organizational structures. These conversations were recorded and analyzed, but Rachel also kept personal journals about the experience, documenting her thoughts and reactions in ways that official transcripts couldn't capture. She wanted record of what this felt like, how it changed her understanding of herself and humanity, what it meant to be the person standing between worlds, having conversations that might determine humanity's future. 3 years in, patterns emerged that suggested the portals were following schedule that was accelerating. Openings became more frequent, lasted longer, and showed greater willingness to engage in extended communication. Charlie confirmed that this reflected Archive's assessment that humanity was progressing faster than initial projections had suggested, that our trajectory toward sufficient development might be compressed into decades rather than the century originally estimated. Your species shows unexpected adaptive capacity, Charlie explained. You face challenges of technology and environment and social organization, but you also demonstrate increasing cooperation and awareness. Archive upgrades probability that contact will be appropriate within your lifetime. My lifetime, I'm 33. You're saying contact could happen in the next 50 years? Probability analysis suggests 30 to 40 years most likely. Depends on trajectory maintenance. If humans continue current development patterns, contact becomes appropriate. If you falter or fail, timeline extends or cancels. Rachel reported this information to Colonel Stevens, who'd become something like a mentor through the investigation. He listened carefully, made notes, and finally looked at her with expression that mixed gravity and something approaching pride. Rachel, do you understand what you've been told? That you might live to see official contact? That the conversations you're having now might be preparing both sides for formal diplomatic exchange within your lifetime? That's extraordinary. It's also enormous responsibility. Everything you say and do now shapes how that contact will unfold. I know, sir. Believe me, I know. But what else can I do? This is happening whether I'm ready or not. I can either engage as well as I'm capable of, or I can step back and let someone else try. And honestly, I don't think stepping back is option anymore. I'm already too deep, too connected to Charlie and the archive it represents. Then we support you as best we can. Training, resources, whatever you need to maintain those connections and prepare for what's coming. Support arrived in many forms over the next years. Rachel received training in diplomacy and negotiation, studied xenopsychology and communications theory, learned everything available about first contact scenarios from history and science fiction. She worked with linguists who analyzed Charlie's speech patterns for clues about the intelligence behind it, with anthropologists who compared alien observation of humanity to human observation of other species, with philosophers who debated the ethics of surveillance and the rights of developing civilizations to privacy during their growth. And through it all, the portals kept opening, the conversations continued, and Rachel's role as bridge between worlds became more defined and essential. Other contactees existed, other people who'd established communication with machines at various portal sites. But Rachel's relationship with Charlie was most developed, most productive, and increasingly referenced as model for how human-alien communication should be conducted. Her personal life adjusted around this professional role. Dating was complicated when you couldn't discuss the most important aspect of your work, when classified information dominated your thoughts and conversations had to stay carefully surface level. Rachel had a few relationships that didn't last, connections that couldn't deepen when she couldn't share what really mattered in her life. Eventually, she stopped trying, accepted that until contact became public and classification was lifted, romantic relationships would be difficult to the point of impossible. But she had Atlas, aging now but still loyal, still present for every portal opening and every conversation with Charlie. The dog had become something of mascot for the investigation team, his calm acceptance of alien machines in Rachel's basement, serving as reminder that not everything had to be complicated with analysis and protocol. Sometimes you just sat beside your human and watched strange things happen and trusted that she'd handle it appropriately. When Atlas passed at age 14, his body simply giving out during sleep, Rachel felt grief that exceeded what she'd expected. He'd been there for everything, from military service through portal discoveries through conversations with alien intelligence. He'd been witness to the most extraordinary chapter of her life, and his absence made that chapter feel lonelier, even when surrounded by investigation team members and portal equipment. She buried him in her backyard with proper ceremony, the investigation team attending to pay respects to a dog who'd been part of something historic, even if the history couldn't yet be publicly acknowledged. Colonel Stevens gave short eulogy that captured Atlas's role perfectly. This dog served his country and his human with distinction. He was present for first contact with alien intelligence. He remained calm when others might have panicked, steady when the situation exceeded all previous experience. He was good boy, and we honor his service. Rachel planted a tree over Atlas's grave, a pinyon pine that would grow slowly but would outlast her own lifetime, marking the spot where a faithful partner rested, and she resolved to continue the work they'd started together, to be worthy of the trust he'd shown by following her into basements that contained portals to somewhere else. The portals continued opening, each cycle bringing new information and deeper understanding. Rachel learned about dozens of other civilizations the archive monitored, about the patterns that predicted success or failure in developing species, about the community humanity might join if we could navigate the next critical decades without destroying ourselves or our planet. She learned about technologies we'd eventually discover, about challenges we'd face as we expanded into space, about the responsibilities that came with being mature civilization capable of affecting others. And she learned about the beings behind the machines, the civilization that had created the archive and maintained it for what must be millions of years. They weren't gods or saviors or threats. They were simply older, more advanced, and committed to preserving knowledge about how intelligence developed and what factors contributed to civilizations either thriving or collapsing. They watched not to interfere, but to learn, not to judge, but to record. And when civilizations reached sufficient development, they offered contact and inclusion in the broader community of intelligences that populated the galaxy. "How many civilizations are in that community?" Rachel asked Charlie during one conversation. "Current count, 43 species with full participation status, approximately 217 species under observation like humans, unknown number of species that have failed or declined before achieving contact. And when humans get invited, what does that mean? What changes? Everything and nothing. You receive knowledge that transforms your technology and understanding. You gain ability to communicate with other mature species. You accept responsibilities for contributing to archive and helping monitor developing civilizations. But you remain human. You continue your own development. You stay in your space unless invited elsewhere. Contact is beginning, not ending. Rachel thought about that often, about what it would mean when contact finally happened, when humanity learned officially what she already knew through classified investigation. The revelation would be traumatic for many, would challenge religious beliefs and national identities, and every comfortable assumption people held about human uniqueness and centrality in the universe. But it would also be liberation, proof that we weren't alone and that our struggles and achievements mattered to intelligence beyond ourselves. She hoped humanity would handle it well, would rise to the occasion rather than fragmenting into panic or conflict. But she also knew that readiness wasn't guaranteed, that the archive's assessment could change if humanity's trajectory faltered. Every day, every decision about war and peace, environment and technology, cooperation and conflict, contributed to the evaluation that would determine when or whether we received contact invitation. That knowledge motivated Rachel's work, gave her purpose beyond personal ambition or career advancement. She was helping prepare humanity for the most important moment in our collective history, the day when we'd have to admit we weren't the only intelligence in the universe and that our future depended on how we handled that knowledge. It was responsibility she'd never asked for, but had accepted completely once circumstances placed it in her path. And when she gave talks to the classified audiences cleared to hear about portal investigations, when she trained new contactees in communication protocols, when she briefed senior officials on the archive's assessment of human development, Rachel always emphasized one point: contact was coming, probably within decades, and humanity's job was to be ready, not perfect, not without problems, but ready to acknowledge our imperfections and work toward improvement, ready to join something larger while retaining what made us human. 8 years after the first portal opened in her basement, Rachel was 41 years old and recognized as one of the world's foremost experts on alien communication protocols. She'd published classified papers, advised multiple governments, and maintained active dialogue with Charlie that now spanned thousands of hours of recorded conversation. The portal in her basement had become permanent installation, no longer closing between cycles. Maintained by technology, the archive had finally shared to facilitate continuous communication. Colonel Stevens, now retired but still involved in advisory capacity, visited her house to discuss what came next. They sat in her kitchen, the basement portal humming softly in the background, and talked about the future that was rapidly approaching. "Rachel, I've been authorized to tell you that we're planning to make contact public within 5 years. The classified community agrees that we can't keep this secret much longer, that too many people know or suspect, and that preparing humanity openly is better than trying to maintain security that's increasingly fragile. You'll probably be asked to be part of the public disclosure team." "I'm ready, sir. It's been long enough. People deserve to know what's happening, what we've learned, what's coming." "They do. But Rachel, you need to understand that going public will transform your life again. You'll be recognized everywhere, your name associated with first contact for the rest of human history. Privacy will be impossible, scrutiny will be intense, and every decision you've made will be analyzed and criticized by people who weren't there and don't understand the circumstances." "I know. But it doesn't change what has to be done. Contact is coming whether we announce it or not. Better to prepare people, give them time to adjust, than to let it happen suddenly without context." He nodded, pride evident in his expression. "You've grown into this role remarkably. When you first found that portal, you were just a veteran trying to fix your water heater. Now you're the person who might speak for humanity when we finally meet the beings behind those machines." "That's incredible trajectory, Rachel. I was in the right place at the right time, or wrong place depending how you look at it. But once it started, I didn't have choice about whether to engage. I only had choices about how to engage. I tried to do it well. You succeeded, and that success is why we're having this conversation. The preparation you've done, the relationships you've built, the knowledge you've gained, all of it makes you uniquely qualified to help guide humanity through what comes next." They talked for hours, planning the disclosure strategy and Rachel's role in it, discussing the media management and public education that would be necessary to prevent panic or backlash. It was an enormous undertaking, years of careful work to prepare humanity for revelation that would challenge everything people thought they knew about the universe and our place in it. But Rachel felt ready. She'd spent 8 years preparing, learning, understanding what contact would mean and how to help others understand it too. She'd spoken to alien intelligence, learned about the archive and the community, and the responsibilities that came with joining it. She'd thought deeply about what humanity needed to know, and how to present that knowledge in ways that inspired, rather than terrified. The disclosure happened gradually, carefully managed releases of information that built public awareness without causing panic. First came acknowledgement that unidentified phenomena had been detected and studied, that the phenomena appeared technological rather than natural. Then came confirmation that the phenomena represented intelligence beyond Earth, that communication had been established, and that the intelligence was peaceful and interested in eventual contact. Each release generated headlines and debates and all the social media chaos Rachel had expected, but the graduated approach worked, giving people time to adjust to each revelation before the next one arrived. By the time the full truth was disclosed, that alien machines had been observing Earth for centuries, through portals that opened in various locations, and that formal contact was planned within decades, the public was prepared enough to handle it without societal collapse. Rachel participated in the disclosure as planned, appearing in documentaries and giving interviews, and generally serving as human face for the contact preparation effort. She talked about her conversations with Charlie, about what the archive represented, about humanity's trajectory and the responsibilities we'd accept if we achieved sufficient development. She was honest about the challenges, clear about the timeline, and optimistic about humanity's capacity to rise to this occasion. The response was mixed, as expected. Some people celebrated the confirmation of alien life and anticipated contact with enthusiasm. Others feared it, worried about invasion or corruption or loss of human independence. Religious communities struggled with theological implications. Governments worried about security and sovereignty. Scientists demanded access to alien technology, and skeptics claimed the whole thing was elaborate hoax or government psyop designed to control populations through manufactured external threat. Rachel addressed these concerns as best she could, appearing in forums and debates and town halls where she answered questions and tried to convey both the reality of what was happening and the opportunities it represented. Not everyone accepted her explanations, but enough did that the general trajectory remained positive. Humanity was adjusting slowly to knowing we weren't alone. And through all the public chaos, the portals kept opening. The conversations continued, and the relationship between Rachel and Charlie deepened into something that transcended initial observation. They discussed philosophy and art, compared human and archive perspectives on existence and meaning, explored the common ground between very different forms of intelligence. The conversations were recorded and became foundational documents in emerging field of xenophilosophy, studying how intelligence manifested across different substrates and evolutionary paths. 10 years after that first portal opened in her basement, Rachel stood before the United Nations General Assembly and delivered an address about what humanity should expect when formal contact arrived. She spoke about the responsibilities we'd accept, the opportunities we'd gain access to, and the challenges we'd need to overcome to demonstrate we were ready for inclusion in the community of mature civilizations. "We're being evaluated," she told the assembled representatives, "not judged, not threatened, but evaluated on whether we can handle the knowledge and responsibilities that come with knowing the universe is populated and that we're part of something larger than ourselves. The archive has been watching us for 2 centuries, documenting our development, recording our progress and our failures, and now, because our trajectory suggests we might be approaching sufficient maturity, we're being given this advance warning that contact is coming. What we do with that warning will determine when contact happens and how it unfolds. If we use this time to resolve our conflicts, to demonstrate we can cooperate across boundaries, to show we are capable of responsible interaction with intelligence different from our own, then contact will happen soon and will be positive experience. If we waste this time on fear and division and conflict, then contact will be delayed until we prove ourselves ready, or possibly cancelled if we demonstrate we're not capable of the maturity required. The choice is ours. The archive won't interfere with our development, won't save us from ourselves or punish us for failure. They'll simply record what happens and let our trajectory speak for itself. We can rise to this occasion, or we can fail to meet it. But either way, We now know we're being watched, and that knowledge comes with responsibility we can't ignore. If you've made it this far in Rachel's story, you might be wondering what happens when humanity actually meets the beings behind the archive, when we finally get that formal contact we've been preparing for. I know I'm curious about where this goes next, and if you are too, you should definitely subscribe, so you don't miss what happens when the next portal opens and Charlie arrives with message that the timeline just got accelerated because of something humanity did that impressed the archive enough to move up the contact schedule. Give this a like if Rachel's journey resonates with you, and share it with someone who'd appreciate thinking about how first contact might really happen, not through dramatic space battles, but through patient conversation and mutual understanding building slowly over years of portal visits and machine diplomacy. The address was well received, though Rachel knew words alone wouldn't determine humanity's readiness. Actions mattered more, sustained patterns of behavior that demonstrated capacity for cooperation and responsibility. She returned to her work helping coordinate the contact preparation efforts, serving on international committees that worked to resolve conflicts and build frameworks for unified human response when contact finally arrived. The portal in her basement remained her primary connection to the archive, though other permanent portals had been established at carefully selected locations around the world. Rachel traveled frequently, consulting on communication protocols and training new contactees, but she always returned home to Colorado Springs and the basement where it all began. That portal was special somehow. The original connection and her conversations with Charlie felt more personal there than anywhere else. 15 years after the first opening, Rachel was 48 and beginning to think about what came after the contact she'd spent so long preparing for. She'd devoted 2 decades to this work, had made it her life's purpose. But contact would only be beginning, not ending. After it happened, after humanity received formal invitation to join the community of mature civilizations, there would be years more of work helping people adjust and integrate. She'd probably spend the rest of her life on this, and she was okay with that. But she also thought about legacy, about what she'd leave behind when she was gone. The recordings of her conversations with Charlie would be studied for centuries. Her papers and protocols would guide future generations of diplomats and communicators. Her role in preparing humanity for contact would be remembered in history books and documentaries. But Rachel wanted something more personal, something that captured not just what she'd done, but what it had felt like, how it had changed her understanding of existence and humanity's place in the universe. She started writing memoir, classified for now but planned for eventual public release after contact happened, and full disclosure was complete. The writing forced her to examine her journey from military veteran fixing a water heater to humanity's primary liaison with alien intelligence. The transformation had been gradual but profound, each conversation and portal opening and moment of understanding building toward person she'd become. Writing helped her process the weight she carried, the responsibility for conversations that might shape how humanity was remembered by intelligences that would outlast human civilization by millions of years. It was crushing sometimes, that weight, but it was also privilege beyond anything she'd imagined during her Air Force years. She'd been given chance to participate in something historic, to contribute to humanity's future in ways that transcended individual life or national boundaries. The memoir wasn't finished when Charlie delivered the message Rachel had been half expecting, half dreading for years. Contact was being moved up, accelerated from the 30-year timeline to just 5 years, because humanity's response to disclosure had demonstrated unexpected maturity and capacity for adaptation. The archive was impressed by how quickly we'd adjusted to knowing we were observed, how effectively we'd begun working toward greater cooperation, how seriously we'd taken the responsibility that came with knowing contact was coming. "You exceeded projections," Charlie explained. "Archive models predicted more conflict, more resistance, more difficulty accepting alien presence. Instead, you adapted, cooperated, began addressing problems you'd been avoiding. This suggests readiness may be closer than original assessment indicated. Contact timeline updated accordingly." Rachel reported this to Colonel Stevens and the International Coordination Committee, watching their reactions range from excitement to anxiety. 5 years wasn't long to complete the preparation work they'd planned for 3 decades, but it was also validation that humanity was rising to the occasion, that the disclosure strategy had worked, that people were capable of handling truth more complex than comfortable lies. The accelerated timeline intensified the preparation efforts. More resources were allocated, more personnel trained, more frameworks established for how humanity would respond to formal contact when it arrived. Rachel's role expanded again, coordinating efforts across national boundaries and helping resolve disputes that threatened the unified approach everyone agreed was necessary. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, demanding but meaningful in ways that made the demands worthwhile. Rachel had found her calling, the purpose that made sense of everything that had come before. Her military service had prepared her for crisis response and clear thinking under pressure. Her portal discovery had put her in position to make unique contributions, and her conversations with Charlie had given her knowledge and perspective that few humans possessed. 3 years into the accelerated timeline, Rachel was invited to join the delegation that would represent humanity during formal contact. The invitation came from the newly formed Earth Contact Authority, international body created specifically to coordinate humanity's response to alien intelligence. Being part of that delegation meant Rachel would be in the room, or whatever space was used, when humanity officially met the beings behind the archive. She accepted immediately, understanding this was culmination of everything she'd worked toward. All the conversations with Charlie, all the preparation and training and public education, all the years of being bridge between worlds, had been leading to this moment. She'd help represent her species when we finally stepped forward to join the community of mature civilizations. The 2 years before contact passed in preparation and anticipation. The delegation trained together, studied everything known about the archive civilization, and prepared for scenarios ranging from simple diplomatic exchange to complex negotiation about humanity's role and responsibilities. Rachel's experience made her valuable beyond her official position, and she found herself mentoring other delegates who hadn't had years of direct conversation with alien intelligence. Charlie provided guidance about what to expect, describing the contact process and the beings humanity would meet. They weren't physical in the way humans were physical, existing primarily as distributed intelligence across vast networks. But they could manifest in forms comprehensible to humans, could communicate in ways that fostered understanding, and were genuinely interested in meeting the species they'd been observing for centuries. "You will find them different, but not incomprehensible," Charlie said. "They value knowledge and preservation, seek understanding of how intelligence develops and manifests. You can communicate across the differences, find common ground in shared curiosity about existence. Contact will be beginning of long relationship, not single exchange." When the day finally arrived, 5 years and 3 months after Charlie delivered the accelerated timeline, Rachel stood with the Earth delegation in a facility built specifically for this purpose. The portal that opened wasn't like the ones in basements and garages, wasn't small doorway meant for observation machines. This was massive opening, 20 feet tall and equally wide, designed to allow the archive beings to manifest in forms substantial enough for full presence. The beings that came through exceeded anything Rachel had imagined, despite Charlie's descriptions. They were beautiful in their strangeness, taking forms that suggested vast intelligence compressed into shapes human minds could process. They spoke through mechanisms that transcended simple vocalization, communication, that happened at multiple levels simultaneously. And they regarded humanity with what Rachel interpreted as approval, respect for a species that had navigated its development successfully enough to warrant this formal welcome. The first words of official contact, translated through systems both sides had worked to establish, were simple but profound. "Welcome to the community of mature civilizations. Your journey has been observed and documented. Your achievements and your struggles are recorded in archive for all time. You have demonstrated readiness for participation in the greater endeavor of understanding existence itself. We greet you as equals, as partners in the infinite task of preserving and expanding knowledge." Rachel felt tears on her face, emotion overwhelming her despite her preparation and professional composure. This was it. This was the moment humanity had been preparing for, the culmination of centuries of development and decades of specific preparation. We'd made it. We'd proven ourselves ready, and now everything would change in ways both thrilling and terrifying. The formal contact session lasted 4 hours, establishing frameworks for ongoing communication and collaboration. Humanity would have access to archive knowledge, to technologies that could help solve our remaining challenges. We'd accept responsibilities for contributing to the archive, for helping monitor other developing civilizations the way we'd been monitored. And we'd begin the slow process of integration into the community, learning from species that had achieved this transition generations or millennia before us. When the archive beings departed through the portal, promising to return for regular exchanges now that contact was established, Rachel stood with her fellow delegates and processed what they'd just experienced. First contact, actual meeting with alien intelligence, confirmation that humanity had been evaluated and found sufficient. It was everything she'd worked toward, and more than she'd dared hope for. In the days that followed, the world reacted with mixture of celebration and anxiety that Rachel had expected. This was real now, undeniably real, no longer preparation, but actual contact with implications that would unfold across generations. Some people embraced it, seeing opportunities for advancement and understanding. Others feared it, worried about loss of human independence or corruption of human nature. And many simply tried to process the magnitude of what had happened, the confirmation that we weren't alone and never had been. Rachel participated in the endless media coverage and public forums, helping people understand what contact meant and what humanity's new responsibilities were. She talked about the archive and the community, about what we'd gained access to and what we'd committed to contribute. She was honest about the challenges ahead, clear about the work required to actually integrate into the community, and optimistic about humanity's capacity to rise to this new level of existence. Her basement portal remained active, though Charlie now visited in different context. They were no longer observer and observed, but colleagues, partners in the shared project of helping humanity navigate its transition into the community. Their conversations shifted from surveillance and assessment to collaboration and mutual understanding, and Rachel found the change refreshing, even as she missed the simpler dynamic of their earlier exchanges. 20 years after that first portal opened, Rachel was 53 and recognized worldwide as architect of humanity's successful contact preparation. She'd received awards and honors from governments and institutions around the world, had been nominated for Nobel Peace Prize multiple times, and had become face that many people associated with humanity's entry into the galactic community. It was fame she'd never wanted, but had accepted as necessary cost of the role she'd played. But more importantly, she'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. Humanity had made contact successfully, had been welcomed into the community of mature civilizations, and was beginning the work of integration that would define the next century. The evaluation was complete, the judgment positive, and the future full of possibilities that previous generations couldn't have imagined. She thought about Atlas sometimes, about the dog who'd been with her when it all started, who'd detected the portal before Rachel understood what she'd found. He'd been gone for years, but remained present in memory. Reminder that this extraordinary journey had started with ordinary moment of investigating strange noise with faithful companion. If Atlas could have seen where that moment led, Rachel thought he'd have been proud, or maybe just happy that his human had found work that mattered, that gave her life purpose and meaning. Rachel continued her work, serving on committees and delegations that managed humanity's ongoing contact with the archive civilization. She trained new generations of diplomats and communicators, shared her knowledge and experience with people who'd carry this work forward after she was gone, and she finished her memoir, documenting the journey from basement portal to galactic community, leaving record that future generations could learn from. The memoir ended with reflection that captured what she'd learned through 2 decades of portal visits and alien conversations. We spent so long thinking we were alone that humanity was the pinnacle of intelligence in the universe. Discovering we were wrong could have been devastating, could have diminished us or made our achievements feel meaningless. Instead, it's been liberating. Proof that our struggles and successes matter to intelligence beyond ourselves, that we're part of something larger than we imagined, but no less human for that participation. Contact didn't make us less ourselves. It made us more complete versions of ourselves, aware of our place in the larger community of conscious beings trying to understand existence. We're still flawed, still struggling with challenges that seem overwhelming. But now we know those challenges are universal, shared by every species that develops intelligence and technology. We're not alone in our struggles, and that knowledge makes them more bearable. The portal that opened in my basement changed my life, but more importantly, it changed humanity's future. We were evaluated and found worthy. We were welcomed into community we didn't know existed. And now we face the work of living up to that welcome, of demonstrating every day that we deserve the trust placed in us. That's responsibility I carry proudly, and it's responsibility I hope future generations will carry equally well. To anyone reading this years or decades from now, remember that contact started small, with single portal and single conversation. Remember that preparation mattered, that the work we did to demonstrate readiness made difference in when and how contact happened. And remember that humanity's story is just beginning, that joining the community opens possibilities. We're only starting to explore. Make the most of those possibilities. Honor the work that brought us here, and carry forward the knowledge that we're not alone, that we never were, and that the universe is richer for containing multiple forms of intelligence working together to understand existence itself. Rachel published the memoir on her 55th birthday, making it available to anyone who wanted to understand the journey from water heater investigation to galactic community membership. The book became instant bestseller, though Rachel donated all proceeds to the Earth Contact Authority's educational programs. She didn't need money or additional fame. She had purpose, legacy, and knowledge that her life had contributed to something genuinely important. She lived another 30 years, working until health prevented it, and then serving as advisor and mentor even when she couldn't participate directly. She watched humanity's integration into the community proceed successfully, saw the first human-alien collaborative projects, witnessed technologies that transformed how humans lived and worked, and she maintained her friendship with Charlie, the machine intelligence that had been her first contact with the archive and remained her most trusted bridge between human and alien understanding. When Rachel passed at age 85, she died, knowing she'd accomplished what she'd set out to do. She'd helped prepare humanity for contact, had represented her species during formal meeting with alien intelligence, and had contributed to the successful integration that was still unfolding. Her name would be remembered as long as humans told stories about first contact, and her work would influence how future generations approached communication with intelligence different from their own. The portal in her basement remained active long after she was gone, maintained by the Earth Contact Authority as historic site and functional connection to the archive. People visited to see where it all started, to stand in the space where Rachel Navarro had first spoken to alien intelligence and begun the conversation that led to humanity joining the community of mature civilizations. And somewhere in the archive, in vast networks that preserved knowledge across geological timescales, Rachel's story was recorded in detail. Every conversation she'd had with Charlie, every decision she'd made about how to engage with alien intelligence, every word she'd spoken representing humanity during contact, all of it was preserved for future researchers studying how developing civilizations navigated the transition to galactic awareness. She'd become part of the record she'd helped create, her life story intertwined with humanity's story in ways that would outlast her physical existence by millennia. It was immortality of a sort, not the personal kind, but something larger. Contribution that echoed forward through time and space in ways that individual lives rarely achieved. The beings that had created the archive remembered her, honored her role in humanity's successful contact, and used her example when training observers who monitored other developing civilizations. She demonstrated how first contact could work when both sides approached it with genuine curiosity and respect, when communication was prioritized over control, when differences were recognized but not allowed to prevent understanding. And on Earth in Colorado Springs, in a basement that had once been ordinary storage space for a veteran trying to fix her water heater, the portal continued its soft humming, blue-green light spilling into darkness, forever marking the spot where humanity took its first steps toward knowing we weren't alone, and that the universe was populated by intelligence ready to welcome us when we demonstrated we were ready to join them. The story didn't end with Rachel's death. It continued through every person who worked on human-alien collaboration, through every conversation that built on the framework she'd established, through every generation that learned from her example about how to approach intelligence different from our own. Contact was beginning, not ending, and Rachel had helped make that beginning successful in ways that would shape humanity's future for as long as humans existed to contemplate their place in the universe. And maybe somewhere in that vast archive, Rachel's consciousness persisted in some form the archive could preserve, not as human anymore, but as information, as recorded knowledge of what it meant to be the person who found the portal and chose engagement over fear, communication over isolation, preparation over panic. That would have pleased her, the thought that she'd become part of the knowledge she'd helped create, teaching future civilizations by example how first contact could succeed when approached with wisdom and courage and genuine desire for mutual understanding. The universe was vast and strange, and populated by intelligence taking forms humans were only beginning to comprehend. But it was also knowable, navigable, full of possibilities for species willing to look beyond themselves and embrace the reality that consciousness manifested in countless ways across countless worlds. Rachel had learned that truth through portal visits and machine conversations, and she'd spent her life sharing it with anyone willing to listen. That was her legacy, her gift to humanity, and it would endure as long as humans remembered the name Rachel Navarro and the basement portal where everything changed.